Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our MPF webinar for the month. It's going to be an interesting show today in that we've got some technology challenges. I'm out of the office today. Uri's running our PowerPoint, and we've been trying to get that transition going, so bear with us if our technology is a little quirky. We're doing the best we can. Technology's great until it's not working for you. Hi, Uri, how are you?
I am great, thank you. Good to see you, John.
Good to see you as well, and thank you as always for co-hosting these programs with us. We appreciate it. And Elise Holtzman, how are you?
I'm doing great, John. Good to see you and Uri.
Long time no see. We were together just a couple of weeks ago. This is what we'll be talking about this afternoon is our fall symposium. Elise was the co-chair, and we had a great program in Chicago with women from all over the country, Canada. I was the only man in the room and felt very intimidated.
It was a great program. We had a lot of fun. Lots of interesting topics we discussed, which we'll get into. Yeah, we sure will. And what struck me, Elise, is how open everyone was. Those dynamics wouldn't have happened among a conference of men or with a lot of men in the room. Folks were so open, willing to share. I think it was fantastic. So thank you so much for the hard work you put into it. We really appreciate it. This is my pleasure. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that is one of the benefits and maybe the thing that makes women's events so special is that there is an ability there and a willingness almost always. I've never seen it where it hasn't happened, where women really get deeply into conversations that they wouldn't have in mixed company. So, and I think you saw that, John. You were like a fly on the wall there.
At least I was amazed, at the energy and the candor. It's like these people have known each other for years.
Right.
And many of them were meeting for the first time at the opening reception. The bonding, the openness, it was really incredible. And I want to do this every year, I think, in the fall, based on the success of the program. So thank you again. It is 1:59, everyone. And as you know, we like to start right on the top of the hour and make a few announcements, share some of the registrant survey data when everybody registered. And we have some live polling questions, and we'll engage in a very lively conversation with Elise. And Elise, you're in New Jersey today, is that correct?
I am.
And since I saw you last in Chicago, you're a globetrotter. You were in Austria, is that correct?
I was in Vienna, speaking for another group of lawyers and moderating another wonderful panel of women leaders in law firms. So it's been a whirlwind couple of weeks, and I've had a lot of really wonderful takeaways and also things that I've been able to confirm once again. So I look forward to sharing some of those with the audience.
So while you're in Vienna, I'm in Norfolk, Virginia. It just doesn't seem fair.
The good news is the jet lag is not as bad, John.
They do have some big ships out there that are pretty fascinating to observe. So let's go ahead and get started, everybody. Welcome. And this is our 40th, hard to believe, Uri, our 40th NPR webinar since COVID sent everybody home. And it's hard to believe. This month, we're going to be highlighting our recent fall symposium. Elise was co-chair with Debbie Foster. And our theme was empowering women in law firm leadership. Before we introduce Elise and run through polling questions, just our announcements, programs through the balance of this year. Our live events are up. We'll be continuing with our webinar series on the third Wednesday. So it's been a really good, successful run, and we'll be back November. Our 2014 Leadership Conference in Atlanta will be opening registration shortly. That's our signature event. The Fall Symposium will present again, first Wednesday, Thursday in Chicago next year. So stay tuned, and our newsletters and website are all out there for you as well. So glad you're here. And Uri, we're going to have to do a next slide. So you bear with us on the technology. Today's webinar. Empowering Women in Law Firm Leadership. We have 75 registrants today, And as always, we will present survey results. We'll introduce some audience polling questions and give you a follow-up with the on-demand recording and a write-up from our friends at 9SAIL. Sarah Brodsky's with us, and she observes and does some write-ups of these sessions, and so you'll be getting that as well. Importantly, we want your feedback on today's program. Don't trash our technology, but feedback. We always tune into that, what you like, don't like, topics for future programs. Uri, anything you got to say before we get started?
Nope, thank you. There is a little tech issue here, so I can't necessarily see you all, my panel, as well as see the screen. So just forgive me if my eye contact seems a little off today, but glad I'm here and glad I can help.
We're glad you're here too. This is our faculty for the Fall Symposium, all women, blend of managing partners, consultants, in-house counsel, and really an exceptional group. And Elise helped recruit many of those faculty. But that's who participated. We still have it up on the website if you want to learn a little bit more, take a look at the agenda and that sort of thing. But now we want to introduce Elise Holtzman, today's guest speaker. Elise is the founder and CEO of The Lawyer's Edge. So Elise, welcome, and tell us a little bit about what you do and what The Lawyer's Edge is all about.
Thanks so much, John. I am a former practicing lawyer, some might say recovering lawyer. I absolutely loved practicing law and grudgingly left the practice of law really due to some of the challenges that that continue to plague women, although it was a very different world back then. I've been out of law school for a long time, and so there were no women's initiatives, no women's bar associations, no women mentors, no DEI initiatives, no part-time schedules, no flexible work arrangements. And so I'm married to a big law lawyer in New York City, and so I came to the conclusion that it really didn't work, although I did love it. And so fast forward, I became a certified executive and leadership coach and started The Lawyer's Edge 15 years ago. And so since the founding of our firm, we've been providing training and coaching services, some consulting as well, exclusively to lawyers and law firms, primarily on the topic of business development and leader development. And so the stuff that we talked about a couple weeks ago at the Empowering Women in Law Firm Leadership Conference was right in my wheelhouse and a lot of fun.
Beautiful. And Elise, I've always been meaning to ask you, what is PCC? JDPCC, what's the PCC?
Yeah, that's a great question. So John, there's an organization called the International Coach Federation, and you know, coaches are not a licensed profession like lawyers, right? And so the International Coach Federation, which is very international, came along to be the self-regulatory body of the coaching profession. And so they accredit training programs. So I took an accredited training program, and they also offer credentials. And so PCC means Professional Certified Coach. And depending on how long you've been practicing and hoops that you've jumped through, you can earn certain credentials through the ICF.
Interesting. I've been meaning to ask you this for years, and I just never have. So I thought I'd take the opportunity this morning or this afternoon. So Uri, jump ahead, and again, I might have to prompt Uri from time to time. When you register, this is our first audience polling question, and you guys know how this works. Mostly for Elise's benefit, if you would just take a few minutes and tell us how many lawyers are with your firm. And you guys know me, I like to joke that in Georgia, we know how to count our votes. So here the votes come in. We've got about 60%. So if you haven't yet clicked your choice here, please do. And then we'll get off to the races. So I'll go ahead and close this. And Elise, here are our firm sizes today. Interestingly, no one less than 10, nobody more than 100. Interesting. So that's who we got on today's call. When you registered, we asked a series of questions, one of which was, what's the percentage of women lawyers at your firm? And the way to read this graph is 50% of today's registrants claim to have between 25 and 49% of their lawyers are women. And about 5% of our registrants, 75% or more lawyers at the firm are women. So we do have a pretty significant women attorneys on today's call and practicing attorneys, the firms represented. Elise, and here's the equity partners. And Elise, comment to this. We talked a little bit about this in Chicago. That is, women move up into the ranks of law firms, they become fewer and fewer as a percentage. What do you think of this data we're seeing?
Yeah, this is interesting to me, John. Let's see, 25 to 49%. I think I'm reading this backwards.
Right, the way to read this is 34% of the firms on today's call, fewer than 25% of the partners are women. In 43%, approximately 50 to 74% of the equity partners are women, which is a high number.
Yeah, it is a high number, and it's interesting because as you saw in the prior poll, you've got a lot of folks here who are representing somewhat smaller law firms, right? We're not looking at enormous law firms. And so I suspect, and I think you guys would probably agree with me, but tell me if you think I'm missing the mark here, that in smaller firms, it may be easier in some ways for them to retain their top female talent. Some of the larger firms, there are some more barriers to entry and there are barriers to staying there. And particularly the ones that are saying they have more than 75% equity partners who are women, many of those firms were likely started by women, particularly so that they could run their practices as they saw fit rather than having to follow somebody else's rules, which may not have fit the life and the career that they wanted to have. So I think it is interesting, and I suspect that if we had more partners on the call who were from much bigger firms, the numbers would go down.
Elise, what are the numbers at big law firms that you're contrasting with here, just to give us some sense of it?
So my understanding is that according to research, the numbers of women in equity partnership are a maximum in larger firms of about 27%. Or something like that, and so that that may even be partnership, and equity partnership might be lower than that. So don't quote me on these numbers, but I have seen that kind of research. I don't think I've ever seen a number higher than 27%.
Yeah, that's what I see. We're that one chart we had in Chicago where the majority of graduates coming out of law schools, first-year associates are women, and they kind of narrow down as we move up the ranks of seniority. Right. And then women of color become almost zero. As we
right, at the partnership level, right, the women of color tend to disappear completely.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is good to see. And, partly in reflection of our topic today, I would think. So, Uri? We also asked, gave you a list, and asked what strategy do you find to be most effective to attract and retain women at your law firms? Pick one. Elise, your comments. And Uri, feel free to chime in here as well if you have any observations or anything you want.
John, as you recall, we did a poll at the conference a couple of weeks ago, and we asked the women in the room the same question. And so it's interesting to see that the polling we did in the room and the polling we're doing here do tend to align with each other. For what happened in the room, the number one answer was flexible work arrangements. Mm-hmm. And so, to the extent that people are still bemoaning flexible work arrangements, of course, we know that there's value in being in the office, particularly when there's collaboration that has to happen, training has to happen, and perhaps meeting with clients has to happen. And yet we saw in the pandemic that flexible work arrangements actually allowed people to bill more hours rather than fewer hours. And so the women in the room were saying that both for themselves and the women that they're trying to retain at their firms, flexible work arrangements can continue to be a top need of the women that are working with them. We also saw the second thing, and I think we phrased it a little bit differently when we were in the room. We asked about business development training and coaching, and of course, I'm particularly passionate about that. That's one of my areas of passion. When it comes to training and coaching. And so recognizing that women, in order to retain them in the profession, I think this goes for all lawyers, but certainly for women, making it clear that being able to contribute to the firm's bottom line in the form of paying clients is very important to their ability to call the shots in their own career. right? To be able to earn higher compensation, to be able to ascend into leadership positions, to be able to call the shots in their own career, and also to be able to help the firm move into an uncertain future. So that was in the room. The second thing that people said was most important was business development and coaching and training, and not to just pretend that we're not running for-profit businesses here. And there are a lot of reasons, and we can talk about that later, that women might say, okay, I'm just going to do good work. But to make sure that we raise the, that we turn the light bulb on for women and say business development is really important. And so we want to give you coaching and training that you need. And then of course, mentoring and sponsorship was something we did an entire panel on. That was the panel that was moderated by my co-chair, Debbie Foster from Affinity Consulting. And there was a lot of conversation about the dramatic importance that mentors and sponsors had in the lives of these women leaders. That, you know, they described things that actually changed their lives or really moved the needle for them, or gave them ideas and the confidence to believe that they could achieve what they ultimately did achieve. And so I'm not surprised to see the lines coming out the way they are on today's poll.
You know, Elise, that was for me the most impactful thing about the Fall Symposium is the conversation around sponsorship, mentorship, and the impact that these individuals had on these women leaders. And it was emotional, some of the stories they shared about that elementary school teacher or that soccer coach that didn't realize the impact they had on my life. And to just take the time to pick up the phone or, you know, go visit them and thank them for what they did.
I mean, there were some very poignant stories. And, you know, one of them strikes me, one of our panelists wound up going to law school. You know, she didn't think that she's a person of color. She came from a background where people weren't doing that. And there was a teacher who basically said, you would be perfect for this. This is, you know, you're meant to do something like this. And this woman is now the managing partner of a 200 lawyer law firm that has expanded throughout the South, that has grown its ranks tremendously over the last few years. And she also talks very much about the person who was managing partner before her, who essentially came to her, and this is a story she didn't tell in the conference, but I happen to know this, who essentially came to her and said, you're the person who should be leading this law firm into the future. And so there she is. And, you know, might she have done it without those people whispering in her ear? Maybe, right? But we all need people who are going to show us what we're capable of, because sometimes we don't even know what we're capable of. And so it's very, very important, I think, especially for women, to see somebody who, and look, one of the person who I'm sharing the story about, one of the mentors was a woman and one of the mentors was a man, right? The previous managing partner. And so it doesn't matter what gender you are, but I do think that sponsorship is important. And I do think that for women leaders or emerging leaders in today's world, having women in positions of power demonstrates to them that there is a seat at the table for them. I mentioned earlier, I did not have that. And I think that having that would have been a tremendous benefit to me.
You know, one of the young ladies did a lunch presentation for this firm here, and she was asking me the difference between mentoring and sponsorship. Wanted some clarification on that. And I've really gained an appreciation for the sponsorship piece and how important that is.
Is that something that you think?
Later we can talk about that now.
Yeah, I can mention it now. I mean, I think the bottom line is, look, we all have a sense of what mentors are, right? Because this mentorship is a term that we've used for millennia. We know that it's typically somebody who has more experience than we do, often somebody who's older than we are, but not always, right? You could have mentors in my life, for example, on technology. John, we talked about the technology challenges. And I don't know if I would survive without some of the younger people in my life, but you have somebody who's kind of walked this path before you. And it's somebody typically outside the chain of command, if you will, outside of your reporting structure, who can be a shoulder to cry on, somebody to give you advice, somebody to let you see some of the blind spots, let you know, quote unquote, how things work around here, right? And so mentors are very, very important. And I encourage people to have mentors and to be mentors in various stages of life, various parts of your life. Sponsorship is a bit different. And sponsorship is something that's really only been discussed over, I don't know, the last 10 or 15 years. I think a lot of it started with a book called Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor, and the name of the author I know well and just went out of my head. It'll come to me, hopefully. But the idea is that she's not really saying forget about mentors, but she wanted to point out the difference between mentors and sponsors. So sponsors are people who actually have influence. These are people with juice. So just to use an example, somebody in a law firm, perhaps the managing partner, someone on the management committee or on the comp committee, somebody who has a lot of business and has management's ear. And so these are people that have the ability to not just give you advice, but to actually help catapult you forward and give you opportunities that you might not otherwise have. So sponsorship activities might include putting a mid-level associate or senior associate in front of a powerful client and letting them run a meeting. It might include giving them other kinds of stretch assignments, putting them on matters that they've never done before, putting them on committees at the firm that are important, and kind of, you know, pounding the table and saying, I need this person to be involved in this. So the ultimate example of sponsorship that everyone on the call will be familiar with is something along the lines of, you know, let's say I'm working for Uri, he's the partner, I'm an associate, I'd like to make partner, and Uri really wants me to make partner because he needs me to help him with his clients. And he feels like if I leave the firm, he's gonna have a really hard time serving his clients. So he goes to the partnership committee and pounds his fist on the table and says, Elise Holtzman has to make partner or I can't run my business. That is sponsorship. And so when people are seeking out sponsors, it's important to be looking for somebody who has influence and is actually able to provide opportunity for you. Now, why would somebody do that kind of sponsoring? Well, I mentioned one of them, right? If you're indispensable to somebody else's practice. And it is along those lines. Sponsorship, not mentorship, is more of a symbiotic relationship. You watch my back, I watch yours. So you are going to be my lieutenant who will help me burnish my image, say nice things about me in my absence, and run through a wall for me to help me with my clients and help me at the firm. And I, in turn, I am going to grow you and develop you and not just give you advice, but put you in those situations where you're going to be able to get the experience that will lead to increased compensation and leadership opportunities.
I didn't explain the concept nearly as articulately as you did, Elise, to Audrey at lunch today, but yeah, it's an important distinction. One comment was made, sponsorship goes on when you're not in the room. It's what happens when you're not in the room, you know, where the mentorship is much more of a direct one-on-one interface.
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at it, right? Because again, that sponsor is out there talking you up. And it could be something simple as a client. There's a Harvard Law School case study that I've studied with some colleagues of mine in the consulting business. And, you know, this partner made his associate somewhat crazy. I mean, he kept putting her in situations where she was a little bit terrified, but he knew she could handle it. And he actually once went to his client and for a big meeting and said, I can't be there, but I'm sending you so-and-so, and she's got this. Now, she didn't know that conversation was being had, so she was a little put out, not realizing, right, that she was being put in a good position, but he knew she could handle it. He checked it with the client in advance. She wasn't in the room, but he was giving her that runway and making it easier for her to step into that role.
Great example. Uri, any comments to this particular set of data?
Yeah, John, I'm struck, it was mentioned earlier, but just to double down, highlight a little bit, you know, the ability of smaller firms, and today's audience's participants are exactly squarely smaller and mid-sized firms, to be able to double down on flexible work arrangements, mentoring and sponsoring is really key. I mean, this is something that Big Law does not do as well as you. And, you know, so many times when we're counseling our clients, we're talking about, how do I compete? How do I compete? Well, this is how you compete. This is really in the wheelhouse and the ability of so many smaller and mid-sized firms that Big Law doesn't do nearly as well. And so this is a competitive advantage. And as Elise gives examples of this further into our program, I think these are really good takeaways to discuss. I mean, this is what works, and we should double down and do more of it. So that's what I get out of this slide.
DEI initiatives, I'm a little surprised to see so low. You know, you'd think, being like, hey, that's the magnet. We've got all these DEI initiatives going on. Why isn't that getting higher response?
I'm not an expert on DEI. I mean, you know, I work with women, but I can't say that I'm a DEI person specifically, although I've worked in some of those initiatives. And, you know, I'm not sure what the answer is. I think that the DEI initiatives, the ones that are really good, are focusing on some of the things we're talking about. So I think the DEI initiatives by themselves are maybe not the answer. When DEI initiatives incorporate an understanding of the need for training, coaching, flexible work arrangements, mentoring and sponsoring, all of that sort of thing, then, they're the ones who can potentially, if you have those folks in place in your firm, potentially create ideas for these things and run some of these things. But I think it's a recognition that, each individual, whether there's a DEI program or not, has the opportunity to latch onto some of these things to be able to grow as an attorney and as a leader.
I'd be curious what some of the others are. Maybe type it in, everybody. If you answered other, you got a strategy out there that's working, let us know, and we'll take a look and share with what comes in on that other category. So Uri, I think we're ready to move forward here, and we have another audience polling question. So let's pull this up. And there it is. Has your firm ever had a woman in the leadership role? Elise, as people are casting their ballots, what do you think? Do you think most of today's firms have or have not had a woman in the leadership role?
I think most of them have not, although I think the numbers are increasing, especially in the smaller law firms.
You're going to like these numbers. Share. There we are. Good to see. Partly, obviously, the topic is attracting women leaders. That's good. Our polling, we do our annual leadership survey in 182 firms. In April of this year, we asked the same question. 22% had reported having had a woman managing partner in their histories. 22%. So there we are in terms of women in the top leadership role. Uri? See, Uri's running the program remotely. He's running our PowerPoint deck. I'm here in Virginia running the audience polling. So we've got a global webinar going on here and a little bit of a technology lag, it appears. Elise, this you talked about quite a bit in Chicago. And I thought it was a great opening session, the socialization. Talk to us about what you mean here. And
the reason, John, so the name of the program was the double-edged sword of perfectionism, and how women can perhaps get past perfectionism to grow and lead. And I'm very passionate about this topic because, there's been a lot of talk over the years about these systemic barriers to women in the profession. And we know that there are some of those that continue to exist, right? That, set up for many billable hours, not set up for a lot of flexibility, those kinds of things. And yet I think that what these days is even more of an issue, and something that I'm simply trying to raise awareness of, is how girls continue to be socialized. What happens is we socialize boys and girls differently in our society. And again, not a criticism, simply an observation. We know this. The question is, what do those different methods of socialization do in terms of having an impact on women's willingness and ability to move forward and to lead and to develop business and those kinds of things? And so there's a book called Brave Not Perfect, written by a woman named Reshma Saujani. And Reshma also has a TED Talk, so if you don't want to read a whole book and you want to watch a quick TED Talk, you can find that. She essentially talks about the idea that boys and girls are still socialized differently. So girls, we teach them that they should get straight A's, sit quietly, be polite, be nice to everyone, say yes, be helpful, don't speak out of turn, don't be too loud, be clean and pressed and put together, and your hair looks nice and your nails are clean and all that sort of thing. In short, to be perfect. Whereas with boys, we say, jump off the top of the monkey bars, play in the dirt, get dirty, have dirt under your nails, be loud, advocate for yourself, boys don't cry, all of that sort of thing. And even to break the rules sometimes, because after all, boys will be boys. In short, to be brave. And so the thing is that for women, perfectionism actually, the reason I say there's a double-edged sword there is that women actually do quite well with perfectionism for a time. I mean, it might drive you crazy, but it does reap some rewards. So maybe the teacher likes you and puts you on committees. You know, you get the benefit of the doubt. You're getting good grades. Everyone says, oh, that Elise, she's such a lovely girl, right? Just the kind of girl that, you know, you would want your kid to bring home to mom and all of that sort of thing. And so we get good grades, and you go to the great university, and you go to the great law school, and you get to the law firm, and you do really good work, and you're earnest, and you put in the hours, and you go the extra mile. You're doing really well. As you become more senior, all of us, your job becomes more about managing people and processes and less about doing, less about the individual contributions and more about becoming a leader, becoming a rainmaker, and having a contribution that you're managing and making happen rather than necessarily doing it all yourself. That requires a different set of skills, right? Leadership requires things like risk-taking, being willing to be wrong, being willing to speak out even if not everybody agrees with you, being willing to move ahead without consensus. And so when you've been pursuing perfection rather, your entire life, and essentially pleasing other people, right? That's what perfectionism is about, because everyone agrees there's no such thing as a human being who's perfect, and yet many women are still trying to pursue perfection to please someone else. When you're busy spending your life trying to jump through the right hoops and please somebody else, you're not practicing those leadership skills. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have the capability of doing them. It simply means that you haven't been practicing them because those are not the things that people have been asking you to do. And so imagine you're at this stage where there is a shift, there's a transition here. Most people aren't going to wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm ready for leadership now. Everything that's made me really, really successful for the last 40 years, I'm just going to stop doing. I'm going to just throw out everything I've ever done and start something new. That's not what happens. So I think it's important for male leaders as well as women to understand how socializing girls to be perfect can get in the way later when they are looking to become leaders, when they're looking to become rainmakers. Because we know that many women will kind of step back and wait. It's like they're waiting for the right time. And there was the Hewlett-Packard research that a lot of people probably know about, where there was a job, Hewlett-Packard put up a job description, and let's say there were 16 competencies you were supposed to have. And women who had 14 or 15 of them would say, well, I don't have the 15th or 16th, so maybe in 5 years when I get that, I'll be able to apply. And the guys were like, I got 7, I'll give it a shot, right? And so, you know, it's not, again, it's not a question of right or wrong, it's a question of what is. And does this impact every single woman on the planet? Of course not, right? But we see these things with broad strokes. And when leaders understand that, that's why sponsorship can be so important, right? Because you're basically saying to somebody, go try this out. It may not be perfect, but you're ready for it. And you see that that kind of socialization needs to be looked at and examined, and then help people step beyond that so they can step into leadership roles.
So Elise, I'm hearing, so understand socialization. So as leaders of our firms, when we want to bring people into leadership, be sensitive that some people might not step forward naturally or on equal time, despite being equally or maybe even exceedingly talented.
100%. And look, we know this even from volunteer activities, right? For those of us who sort of have sucker stamped on our forehead and are constantly volunteering for things, right? We know that when not everybody is just going to raise their hand and volunteer. Sometimes our best volunteers are people that we had to go out and ask and say, hey, Uri, we'd love you to do this with us. We think you'd be terrific at it. So part of it is some people may not raise their hand and say that they're ready for something because they are kind of waiting to be asked for some reason. They don't necessarily feel ready because they don't feel that they're perfect and they've jumped through every hoop. So I think part of it is sometimes having the leaders of the firm look around and say, who do we think is somebody that could step into leadership if given the right opportunity and given a little bit of a boost and a little bit of a trial period. And then making it clear to people, we're not looking for perfection here. It's okay that you don't have this experience yet. None of us had this experience before somebody gave us the opportunity. And so we're going to be here to help support you and guide you, but we know that you can take this and run with it.
Any other things to keep in mind that you would recommend, Elise, based on that socialization? So recognizing talent that might not otherwise step forward. That was your main point. And any other socializations, issues, teams, team building, how is that different? And what can we do as firm leaders understanding that difference?
Yeah, I do think that all of this does, these things that we're talking about they're all woven together. So if you have sponsorship, if you have mentorship, if you say to somebody, we want you to be on this committee because we think you would be a valuable addition. Yes, we know you've never done it before. And we're going to have Susie or Jim here, be a mentor for you. So if you ever have any questions, of course you can come to me too, but Jim is your first line of defense. He wants to help develop you into this person. So mentorship and sponsorship, right, along with letting people know that perfection isn't expected, that we understand this is a learning process, that we see this as a growth opportunity for you. We are committed to you for the long term. I think is important. And I also think that, and we're going to talk a little bit about, women's groups and women's initiatives. There was a time that even I didn't necessarily believe that women's initiatives really were going to move the needle at all. And some of them do and some of them don't. But what I do say to women's groups when I'm working with them is one of the things that I think that you can do to help move yourself ahead is to surround yourself, with other badass women. Because you can have these conversations that John and I were talking about earlier. You can share opportunities that have come up for you, triumphs that you've had, as well as some of the challenges you're experiencing, and not feel that you're being judged by someone, that there's somehow something wrong with you, or that you're not going to be a leader because you had this fleeting thought.
I love that line when there was a breakout of applause. Surround yourself with other badass women. And we had a room full of badass.
We sure did. We did.
Really cool. So hurry on to our next slide, please. And where are we moving into? We talked about this, flexible work arrangements and how important that is.
What does that mean? What does that mean, Elise? And where is that effective and less effective?
I think flexible work arrangements mean different things to different people, right? Back when I tried to do part-time, my law firm wasn't really doing part-time. Fortunately, they seemed to like me, so I asked for it. They said they were willing to give it a shot. And it was 40 hours a week in the office for 80% of your salary. And so there was some flexibility there in the sense that I wasn't supposed to have to come into work on Fridays, but the phone was constantly ringing. I was the most senior associate in my practice group. I was running hundreds of millions of dollars of deals. So there was a little bit of flexibility there, but it wasn't the kind of flexibility that exists now, right? There was no such thing as remote work. There was no such thing as a laptop that you could take home. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this, but when I started practicing law, I think it took a couple of years before there was a Wang computer on my desk. I remember when the firm instituted email, people were horrified. So it's been a couple of years, but I think now people want to feel like grown-ups. They want to feel, we know that people build tons of hours during COVID because they weren't commuting, all right? They weren't running around doing a million other things. So they were working many, many hours. It was not that people can't work many hours with flexible arrangements. I think there's always been a fear of that because, of course, most law firms are making money on the billable hour or something that translates to the billable hour. But I think that for many people, it's really about doing it in a way that makes sense for them. There are some women that will tell you that they wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, they work, then they get their kids ready for school and do the carpool, then they go to work, and then they do the same thing at night, where maybe they're doing dinner, and this could be dads as well, by the way. They're doing dinner, and then they get back on the laptop at night. Some people have other ways that they want to handle their work arrangements. And so I think that treating people as human beings and as people who can make decisions about what's best for their clients and that they do care about the clients seems to make sense. I think that people are very grateful when they have law firms. And again, more and more men are talking about flexible work arrangements as well, of course, particularly in the millennial generation, and it'll be more so in Gen Z. So I think it's really about, there are lots of different things that can constitute a flexible work arrangement, but what works for one person is not going to work for the other person down the hall. And so I think that's the whole point of flexibility. And that, again, that came up as one of the top issues for people. Maybe it's a little bit, and look, not every woman has children, right? Not every woman wants children. And then of course, sometimes when we talk about these things in a room, it can get challenging, right? Because the women who have children are talking about all of their experiences, but not everyone wants them. Not everyone is able to have them. And there are some women in the room always who are struggling with infertility. And so, that can create some emotional responses and thoughts as well. But I think the idea here is that biology is biology. And there are, there's a certain category of people that are the ones that are giving birth to the babies. And there's still this idea that most women are doing more of the lion's share of home type of work. And so with that recognition, right, if we want to change it, potentially we can change it. But without that change in existence right now, where everything is 50-50, I think it's important for people to recognize that you have women in your law firm who are valuable participants in the future of your firm. They're bringing in business, they're doing the work, they're leading your firm into the future. And if you want to retain those people, and it's very expensive to have to rehire and get rid of and have people leave and all that sort of thing, it impacts client relationships, then being willing to be flexible about work arrangements makes sense. Is it going to be the same for every firm in practice? No. Is it going to be the same for every woman? No. But paying attention to it and being open-minded about it and being willing to try things, I think is very important.
I picked up on the term intentional flexibility, being intentional about it because people want it. And it's not paternity leave or maternity leave, it's parental leave. That's one of the things I learned in Chicago. Parental leave is the politically correct term.
Right, and more than that, I mean, keeping in mind that what's happening now is that men who are taking parental leave are getting, it's funny because many of them, unfortunately, are seeing the penalty, right? Many men are still not willing to take the paternity leave because it seems to brand them, as not masculine or as not committed to the firm. And this is something that women have been dealing with for many, many years. But now you can see it sort of, from a different perspective, excuse me, where I talk to young men and some of them are just saying, well, darn it, I'm taking it. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out because my family comes first and they're offering it and I'm going to go ahead and do it. And some of them are saying, well, they're offering me 3 months or 6 months, and I'm just going to take a month because I'm afraid of what's going to happen. So this is not an issue that's going away. I think it's, but as you say, John, flexibility goes well beyond parental leave because, we don't have to take care of these kids just in the first couple months of their lives. This is an ongoing thing, and it's important for society for us to be able to, raise our children with the values that we want to share with them.
One of the slides I wanted to put in here, and you called me out on it, is men need to get, the implicit biases. And I catch myself, saying things like you guys to a room full of, men and women. And, just.
Well, I say that too, by the way. So to me, that's no big, I say you guys because I'm from the Northeast. When I'm in the South, I try to say y'all, but it doesn't come naturally to me. But I do think, and the way you put it was men just need to get it. And I mean, and I did call you out on that because I don't like that terminology, right? I'm not somebody, I love men. I don't think there's anything wrong with men. I think that most men, have their hearts in the right place and they want to get it. And so I think that having conferences like this and sharing with men and some women, because not every woman feels the same way, about what a majority of women, what many women are feeling, some of the opportunities that they see for themselves, but also some of the challenges that are coming up, some of the things that come up that men don't even think about, because again, you were in that room and said, my gosh, I didn't even realize that women were grappling with these things. And so, it's not about male bashing. It's not about blaming other people. It's simply about raising awareness and having an open conversation about what works and what doesn't work for everyone's benefit.
Well, I'm certainly working on it, and
you're a work in progress, John. You are a work in progress.
Elise,
nobody's perfect.
I'm struck when it comes to flexible work arrangements, how some firms, their attitude is, okay, he or she wants to work, we'll let her do that work, but she is definitely an underperformer then, like you were alluding to before. I'm also struck by some firms where, of course, it's the same amount of production, but it's embraced. And it said, they're valuable and they're going to produce here. And that's how we're going to compensate, and everybody has a great conversation about it. But the only difference is the way leadership proposes it, talks about it, and rewards. Somebody could say, I only want to work 1,200 hours. But in some firms, they'll be relegated to the basement. And other firms will say, for this year, and it doesn't have to be, by the way, a woman or a man necessarily. It's just that person wants for this part of their life to be at 1,200 hours. And that is okay. And so some firms are embracing that, and I see some firms, same production, are not embracing it.
So Uri, you raise an excellent point. It really is about the mindset and about the messaging. And so when people label somebody permanently, right? It's like, well, this person wants to take a little bit of a step back. That means, and let's call her she, this person she, that means that she's not so committed to the firm, that her family comes before the rest of us, and that obviously that means she's not going to be a productive member of our firm for very long. And so, and some partners will say, well, I'm not going to work with her. She's kind of dead to me, right? And then you've got law firms who say, you know what? Sally is a superstar. She's got, 2 kids under the age of 3. We get it. She's going to take a little bit of a step back. She's an important voice for us. No, she's not going to generate as much business this year. And you know what? We'll talk to her about her compensation. We'll figure out something that makes sense. But we want to keep her here. We want to grow her. Like, remember, if you can take a long-term view of the future of your firm, rather than this like very narrow view of this is what's happening right this second, I think there's a payoff. There were a couple of women on our panels in Chicago, one in particular, Kelly Culhane, who talked about this idea that she did take some time off. She just said, I can't do this. I've got 3 kids under the age of 4. This is absolutely insane. And she did slow down and she did take a break. And then she roared back into the legal profession, started her own firm, and grew a tremendously successful firm in a short period of time. Right? But the idea was, it doesn't mean that if you're in your early 30s and you decide you need a 1,200-hour year or a couple of 1,200-hour years, that's it for the rest of your career. And so I think it is important for people, if law firms look at their people and they say, this is a valuable member of our firm or employee at our firm, and we want to take the long view, yes, this is a business. And so should that person be compensated as highly as the person down the hall? Of course not. But should it mean that they're off track for the rest of their natural lives? I would posit also, of course not. It doesn't make sense for the individual, and it doesn't make sense for the strength and success of the firm.
Okay. Uri, we looking at the time here, so we got a couple more polling questions. We've talked a little bit about women's initiatives. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our polling question as to how many firms on our call have women's initiatives in place, however we might define that. Yes, no, we're working on them. Give us some thoughts about women's initiatives, Elise, as our votes roll in.
Yes, I think women's initiatives can be immensely successful. However, I also think that many of them are not. And I think that there are 2 reasons for that. One of the reasons that women's initiatives can be unsuccessful in moving the needle. First of all, I think we need a definition of success. And for every firm, that's going to be different. We have a women's initiative. Interesting. Okay. And look, in smaller firms, again, it's hard to do everything. And so I'm not surprised that there are not as many firms that have them in this cohort. To the extent that your firm decides that having a women's initiative or some kind of women's affinity group would be worthwhile, I encourage you to think long and hard about it. What is the goal of the women's initiative? What are you trying to make happen? Are you looking at retention? Are you looking at developing leaders? Are you looking at just having people be more comfortable as part of the culture? Are you looking at developing rainmakers? It could be all of the above. It could be 1 or 2 of the above. And have the women in the group make up their minds what success is going to look like for them. The other thing is that rather than what happened in the past when this whole thing first started, understandably so, because nobody really knew what they were doing, was that the leadership of the firm, largely male, of course, would say something like, oh, they want a women's initiative? That's great. We can put it on our website. It'll make it clear that we care about it, blah, blah, blah. And then what happens is I start getting phone calls. And I start getting phone calls, hey, would you come in and do a program for us in our women's initiative? We'd like to hear you speak. Almost none of them had any budget. So they were not given a budget of any kind. And so as a result, they weren't really able to bring in speakers. And it also made me, there was, this happened to me a couple of times where the women's initiatives would say, well, we don't want to pay you, but it'll give you exposure to come in and talk to us. And I do speak for groups for no money. I speak for bar associations and that sort of thing. But speaking for law firms is a major part of my business model. And the irony was that they weren't willing to pay women to come in and talk to them for their value. They wanted to, they want to be valued, but they weren't willing to pay people to come in and speak for them. And part of that was because they didn't have any budget. So the management committee will say, well, they have a women's initiative. What are they complaining about? Well, what's happening in that women's initiative when they don't have benchmarks, they don't have a structure, they don't have specific goals, and they don't have any budget to kind of bring in some of the training and coaching and consulting that they might like to have, or to go do a conference or something like that. So I encourage you, if you're going to do something like that, make it a part of your budget. It doesn't have to be, necessarily a gazillion dollars, but figure out what would be reasonable. And by giving them a budget, you're empowering them to actually do something as an organization, rather than having it turn into kind of a place where people kind of complain and get each other riled up. And I'm not suggesting that that's what women do when you put them in a room, but it is frustrating when you say, here's a way that we're going to help keep you in the profession, and it's a completely, it's a process and a structure that isn't useful.
Why do you think, Elise, why does that happen, Elise?
Look, I think that law firms are businesses for profit. Every law firm has a budgeting process. It's not easy to decide where your dollars are going. And I think that it's only in the last few years that people have recognized the value of retaining women in the profession, not just doing it because it sounds like the politically correct thing to do, understanding that it can be done, that it has a value to the firm. So I think that many women's initiatives are much, much better than they used to be, but still not all of them are doing it. And so I think it's a challenge, and I think that it does reflect, again, not necessarily a criticism, but a reality that your budget reflects what your firm views as being important at that time. And if the management committee doesn't view this as being an important initiative, they're not going to fund it, or they're not going to fund it with very much.
Got it.
This result stunned me. I'm shocked that 60% of the firms on the call don't have some sort of women's initiatives in place. I'm stunned. I would thought just about all of them would. So,
well, I want to mention one more thing, and then I know we have maybe some time constraints here, but one of the other things that I want to mention is that there's an issue inside of law firms, and I don't think we have a slide for it. There's an issue inside of law firms about kind of good firm citizenship, right? Doing the work of the firm that needs to be done, that's all on a volunteer basis. And I encourage law firm leaders to look at their firms and look at who is populating these committees. Are you putting women on committees that are sort of the housekeeping committees, right? They make sure that, we have good culture, and we have parties, and we make people happy. And then your management committees and your compensation committees and your, what is the future of this firm going to look like committees are largely men, right? And so part of that is that I remember a client of mine going to his firm retreat. They have a number of women partners. Someone assigned tables and scattered the women partners throughout the tables, so that many tables there was a woman partner. And one of the speakers asked them to get into breakout sessions and take notes, and then report back out. And so every single table reported that the person who took notes at the table was the woman partner. Again, unconscious bias on everybody's part. Many of the women did it because they were basically asked to or expected to do it without even recognizing it. One woman who I happen to know for many, many years spoke up, or somebody else spoke up and said, wow, that's so sexist. What are you asking her for? And she said, yeah, that is kind of sexist. And guess who took the notes? Her, right? So she still wound up taking the notes. So the idea is that there are times, and there's actually a podcast episode I did with a woman by the name of Bobby Liebenberg, who is a prominent attorney and has been on the ABA's Commission on Women in the Profession, and Judge Margaret McEwen of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They were on my podcast. They've written an article about this and what happens to women who wind up doing all of these feel-good things at the firm that don't necessarily contribute to the bottom line. Not only do they throw a lot of their work into it, and they're not necessarily doing work that promotes the bottom line of the firm, but then they are viewed as sort of the moms of the firm, right? And so the moms don't get compensated the same way. The moms don't get moved up the same way. And so sometimes maybe saying, okay, you know what, this year Uri's going to run it, and next year Elise is going to run it, and the next year John is going to run it, and the next year's Kelly's going to run it, right? And so being able to understand that what you show people is very important. And if so, all of those sort of housekeeping type committees are women. And so, for example, a women's initiative, don't just assume that every woman in the firm is going to want to take over this women's initiative and run it for you, right? Maybe somebody who gets compensated at your firm could be part of the, one of the people who runs the women's initiative, gets compensated for something like this. It's not just like, oh, it's a woman's problem, so here, you go do another 27 hours a month of work that you're not getting compensated for.
At one of our women's virtual conferences we presented during COVID, one of our panelists really drove home that point and said, the action to get power and leadership in a law firm is in the book of business. Be not distracted by the other committees and all the other opportunities to lead. Build your book of business. That's how you derive power and leadership.
And remember, John, that when you take somebody who is fairly young and earnest and has gotten the good grades and jumped through the hoops, and mom and dad and grandma are proud of me, and the law firm thinks I'm doing a great job, it is very hard to say no. There's a woman in my program right now, the Ignite Women's Business Development Accelerator program, who that is actually the biggest takeaway for her in the entire 9-month program, is that she is one of these people who says yes to everything at her firm. And when something needs to be done at the firm, everybody says, oh, let's go to her because she's fabulous. She's got a great attitude. They love her and she loves to be helpful. But she also recognizes that she's got to say no to some things. And when she started saying no to some things, a couple of her mentors said, oh, thank God it's about time.
Interesting. Ori, we're coming down to the home stretch. What do we got here? Our polling question we have asked. We've got one more segueing into building that book of business. Does your law firm, and I grouped it young lawyers, Elise and I talked about the phrasing of this question to include all lawyers, but does your firm provide marketing, business development training? And in this question, let's ask specifically to its associates and junior partners. Yes, no, or we're working on it. And Elise, this is right in your wheelhouse. What do you think?
I think that they're not going, they're going to provide, some of them may say yes because they've provided a one-off training. I suspect most of them are not doing it on any sort of consistent basis. Again, not a criticism, just an observation. I would love them to do more. And as you say, this is my wheelhouse and my passion, but I think that for smaller firms, it's also a challenge. I think it can be done, but I doubt they're doing it consistently.
Uri, what you think? Do you think most of the firms here are doing some training for their lawyers on this stuff?
Well, I think Elise nailed it. When we ask this question, people say, oh, sure. And they say, oh, what'd you do? And they say, well, we went to a conference in January, or we did one thing, but it's not really a lot of development training. That's what I think.
Pretty evenly split among our our three answers, but work in progress, we all know means no.
Right. Yeah, and I just want to share something just to make something clear, because it's something that a question mark that I see comes up for a lot of people. When you're thinking about training and coaching, I encourage you to think about it in different ways. Training is more about information transfer, knowledge transfer, turning on the light bulb for people, giving them a structure, saying, hey, this is something you need to know, or maybe you knew it, but you forgot, right? And you haven't been implementing it, but here's something you should know. Coaching is about implementation and customization, helping people figure out a way to make it work for them, right? John is going to develop business differently than I'm going to develop business. We're different people. We have different personalities. We have different practice areas. We're in different geographies. We're in different generations. Okay. And so how do you make it your own? And then the coach doesn't hold your feet to the fire. People talk about accountability. It's about the coach holding your own feet to the fire, helping you stay accountable to what you said you were going to do, right? Not getting in trouble with the coach. The coach is there to help hold you accountable to what you said you were going to do. So the training is about knowledge transfer and opening eyes, and the coaching is about implementation and customization. And the reason that the combination of those is so powerful is because we all know that we can go to the world's best conference, and within a couple of days, we forget like 95% of what we learned. And even if we're super enthusiastic in the conference, most of us, because of human nature, will go back to our desks and do the same things we've always done, which often means in the business development context, not much. And so I encourage you to put those two things together so that you're giving people a structure and you're helping them take action on a daily basis to move the needle.
Very good. Uri, we skipped a slide there. I'm not sure we need to spend a whole lot of time on this one, but the mentoring sponsorship thing, I think we covered pretty well. that sponsorship piece. And we talked at the women's conference about the reluctance of some men to sponsor women. The optics around that might not be comfortable, and some men just don't want to get in there, you know, and get too close with a young female associate. Talk to us about that challenge.
I mean, look, I've heard different people say different things. I mean, I've always had male sponsors in my life. I was blessed to have them. They never gave a darn what my gender was. They were just there to support me and to move me ahead, and I owe a lot to them. I think that some men are afraid because of the, you know, the Me Too movement, and all of that sort of thing. And so, you know, the concept of he said, she said. I recently spoke to a male partner who is in a mid-sized firm in Manhattan who I'm coaching on business development. And he basically said to me, like, I won't go out to lunch with a woman. I don't want to go out to dinner with a woman because of what people might think. I'm just afraid of the whole thing. A lot of women would say, get over yourselves. That's completely ridiculous. If you have the right intentions in mind, right? And if you're a professional, this is not going to be a challenge. I can't say that I agree with that 100%. I'm not going to poo-poo people's views on things if they have a strong feeling about it. What I will say is that there are so many examples. I mean, until recently, almost all sponsors for women have been men. And I think that there have been some very powerful professional relationships between people. And so I encourage you to engage in them. If it makes you more comfortable to, you know, go to lunch in the cafeteria instead of going out to a restaurant, to do it instead of dinner. If there's a way to get yourself more comfortable with it, do that. But I encourage you not to shy away, because you can have a massive impact, not only on an individual attorney at your firm, but on the firm's growth as a whole.
Well, thank you. We're at 2 minutes of before the hour, and Uri, thank you for running our slideshow today. Appreciate it. Not easy, I know. You're kind of blindfolded there, and I thought we did okay. So thank you. Kudos for doing a job there, and Elise, thank you as well for your participation. I thought this was a great program, and you always do a great job. So
my pleasure, always. Thank you guys
for doing it. And as I mentioned at the outset, give us your feedback. When we hang up today, you'll get directed to 4 questions, and we want to hear what you have to say, particularly topics for future webinars. We're really tuned into that. You'll get this recording on demand. We'll archive it on the website, send you the handout materials with all the polling data we collected. Our friends at 9 Sail will be writing a recap, and we want to thank them for their support of our seminar series. And that's the folks at 9 Sail. They do search engine optimization work exclusively for law firms, sharp group of people. So you may want to check them out. And there was one other announcement. It is what it is.
We don't know what that announcement is, but there was another announcement.
Entertain your emails or phone calls if you'd like to chat with her further. And you can reach out to Uri and I as well. We're always happy to talk. So there's our contact information. Elise, thank you again. Uri, thank you, John. And thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.